In this screencast, I'm going to be talking about chapters 27 through 34 of Pride and Prejudice. So, we know that Jane, when we read last, Jane had traveled to London to try to kind of throw herself in the way of perhaps seeing Mr. Bingley again. Mr. Wickham had shifted his attention to another girl, a woman who has just inherited a large fortune. So we kind of start seeing his kind of the fact that he is clearly a little bit of a gold digger. And then we talked a lot about the Gardiners and their relationship with Jane and Elizabeth specifically, and how Elizabeth really values the Mrs. Gardiner especially, like her advice and opinions and that kind of thing. So at the beginning of this section, Elizabeth is going to travel with Sir William Lucas, who is Charlotte's father, to visit with Charlotte and Mr. Collins in their new home. When they get there, Charlotte is obviously very delighted to see her. On the second day of her visit, she runs into Miss de Bourgh, who is Lady Catherine, who owns the estate, Rosings Park, and they see her daughter, and she describes her as being sickly and cross. And she kind of takes a little bit of satisfaction or glee in the fact that Darcy, who is supposedly fated to marry this young Miss de Bourgh, she kind of supposes, views that with a little bit of glee and joy, that he's going to be connected with such an unappealing person. Miss de Bourgh invites them to dine at Rosings. While she's there, Elizabeth is grilled by Lady Catherine about her upbringing. And Lady Catherine decides that the Bennet sisters must have been poorly raised. Mrs. Bennet's failure to hire a governess for the girls' lack of musical and artistic abilities, and Elizabeth's own kind of impudence, which stems from the fact that Elizabeth is unafraid to speak her mind. And that's kind of seen as being a little, I think that Lady Catherine maybe had never had anybody ever, a female especially, be very frank and truthful to the point that Elizabeth was in that conversation. A week later, Darcy and his cousin, who is Colonel Fitzwilliam, they visit their aunt at Rosings. While they're there, they pay a visit to the Collins' home and talk with Elizabeth and my brain just stopped. Charlotte, sorry. And then the Collinses and Elizabeth receive another invitation to dine at Rosings. And we find that Colonel Fitzwilliam pays kind of special attention to Elizabeth during dinner. After the meal, she's asked to play the pianoforte, and she enters into a conversation with Darcy and Colonel Fitzwilliam. And she tells Colonel Fitzwilliam about Darcy's bad behavior at the Meryton Ball, where he refused to dance with her, but any young lady, really. The next day, Darcy shows up and tells Elizabeth that Mr. Bingley is unlikely to return to Rosings or to really kind of spend an extended period of time at Netherfield, not Rosings, I'm sorry, in the future. And then they have this really kind of awkward conversation. He's behaving very awkwardly, like unsure of himself, which is not like him. And after he leaves, Charlotte kind of suggests or hints that she thinks that Darcy may be in love with Elizabeth because of the way that he's acting, because of he's so awkward, which Elizabeth is like, whatever. And Darcy and his cousin come over quite frequently after that point to the parsonage while Elizabeth is there. During the daytime, she's taking frequent walks out in nature, checking out the sights, and she encounters Darcy and Fitzwilliam almost every time that she goes outside. She has a conversation with Fitzwilliam, and it's an integral conversation. It's very important. Elizabeth learns that, according to Fitzwilliam, that Darcy recently came to the aid of his friend by saving him from an imprudent marriage. And Fitzwilliam doesn't go into a lot of details, but Elizabeth is very sure that this friend that Darcy was supposed to save from an imprudent marriage was Bingley, and that Darcy has had something to do with separating Bingley and Jane. Okay, so one day she's all alone at the parsonage. Darcy bursts in. He abruptly declares his love for her, asks her to marry him. And Elizabeth, at first, she's like, politely declining. But then as he continues on, like he's talking all about the fact that he's overlooking her social status and the fact that she doesn't have any fortune or any connections. And he's just going on. And she gets angry at this conversation that they're having. And first she asks him point blank if he is the one who sabotaged Jane's romance with Mr. Bingley, which he admits. He admits that he did that. And then she said she wants to know the truth about his dealings with Wickham, which he doesn't tell her of, or very clearly anyway. She declares that she thinks he's proud, that he's selfish, and that a marriage to him would be utterly unthinkable. And Darcy leaves in a huff, and he's upset. So a couple of final thoughts on that. This visit to Rosings, the first visit, establishes Elizabeth as the only individual who dares to stand up against the haughty Lady Catherine, who spends most of her time looking down on people, ordering everybody about, criticizing, everything about Elizabeth, essentially, her upbringing. Elizabeth jumps to the aid of her family. She defends them, which in Lady Catherine's eyes makes her impertinent. And that's going to play a role a little bit later on in a plot twist in the story as well. Darcy's proposal is kind of the turning point of Pride and Prejudice. Up until this point, Elizabeth's main focus has been detesting this man, disliking him, thinking he's proud, thinking he's arrogant. And so it kind of really comes at a shock to her that this transpires. Now, from this point forward, we'll begin the slow reversal of that, where she is growing. Once she understands a couple of things, she's going to start growing more fond of him, seeing his side of things and that kind of thing. So at the moment, though, her hurt feelings and her hurt feelings from the very beginning, from the Meryton ball, let's go all the way back there, where he refused to dance with her because she wasn't handsome enough to tempt him, all the way through now, in addition to the situation between Jane and Bingley and the situation with Mr. Wickham, who she still doesn't have Darcy's side of the story for, they are going to cloud her judgment, which is why she refuses him in that proposal. So she kind of holds all those offenses against him. Just as Elizabeth yields to her prejudices, right? She's already formed an opinion about Darcy without knowing the whole story. Haven't seen that half of it, that side of it. Darcy is going to allow his pride to guide him. The pride of being rejected, the proud nature that he's had from the very beginning. And in his proposal, he actually spends more time emphasizing her lower ranking and her lack of connections than he does actually asking her to marry him, almost as if like he can't believe that he's even asking this. He's kind of fought against his better judgment, and he's fought against his social status and the difference, the vast ocean that separates them. And so he, instead of declaring his affections and focusing on that side of it, he almost makes it seem like he's marrying her he wants to marry her against his better judgment, which is not the way you want to be proposed to. And this is the second such proposal that she's received since the novel started, where it's not about affection or it doesn't appear to be about affection. Because we saw that also with the proposal with Mr. Collins, where he was like, oh, hey, I want to get married because it's what I should be doing. It's what my patroness tells me I need to do. It's what society tells me I need to do. And so far, these men aren't sweeping her off her feet. But that's going to begin to shift and change as we start uncovering more about the stories behind all of this, which we will pick up in the next set of chapters.